Have you ever wondered how to plan your legacy if you leaned into a military point of view? Welcome this afternoon to the Design Your Legacy podcast. My name is Angelina Carleton. I'm the hostess, and I look to distill the best practices, positive examples in action, and the best ideas to inspire you. As today's affluent are two-thirds self-made, I hope to invite a variety of guests from many walks of life and income levels to bring you their insights and experiences. So, without further ado, meet David Fivecoat. He served about 24 years in the United States Army. He was a paratrooper and he did 4 combat tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. Colonel Fivecoat, retired now, founded the Fivecoat Consulting Group, where he blogs, speaks, and coaches about leadership. So, welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, Angelina. I'm excited to be on your podcast, and hopefully I can help some of your listeners design their legacy.
Yes, absolutely. So is there anything I left out from your background that you would like to share with the viewer or the listener?
Well, that sort of gets at most of it, but I did do 24 years in the military. I graduated from West Point. I was an infantry officer, got to go to the 82nd Airborne Division as a young lieutenant, and then bounced around the world. I went to Kosovo, Korea, Bosnia, Iraq 3 times, and Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, I led 700 people as a battalion commander, doing counterinsurgency in 2010. And then my final job in the Army, I led the gender integration of the United States Army's Ranger School, which happened in 2015 and opened up opportunities for women to serve in all jobs and all units in the Army.
Yes, and we're going to get into that in a moment, the integration of women, because I know that can be kind of a controversial subject. But first, since this is a legacy podcast, what would you like your legacy to be?
Well, so I've been thinking about legacy, and I sort of define legacy as sort of the mark you make on the world. And for me, my legacy that I'd like to see is I'd like people to know that I helped raise an outstanding daughter. I helped expand opportunities for women. I made some small contributions in the global war on terror as a soldier. And then I help people develop their grit and leadership now in my post-Army career.
Yes, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Yes. So the word legacy then obviously has a meaning that's broader than perhaps how estate planning attorneys or accountants look at it.
Yeah. Like I said, I see it as the impact that you make on the world. For me, at least, one of the most important things is I want to be known as a good father. I've got a 12-year-old daughter, soon to be 13. She's big into ballet, and I try to work hard to be the best father that I possibly can be, which I see as one of my legacies, because hopefully she'll be around long after I'm gone.
Yes. Okay. That's very deep. Thank you. And what's her name?
Her name is Nora.
Nora. That's sweet.
Yeah.
That's sweet. Okay. So speaking about families, did your parents talk much about legacy growing up, or is it something that is something you thought of kind of more in recent times, or was it kind of a family tradition? What's the backstory?
Yeah. So I grew up in Central Ohio, close to Columbus, Ohio. So I am an Ohio State Buckeye fan. And so I think we may not have the same opinions on that.
Any Lions? Go ahead.
But it really wasn't a discussion between myself and my parents. My father grew up on a small farm in Eastern Ohio. He was the first person in his family to attend college. My mom was an early executive in the computer science industry and worked with computers really from the late 70s, early 80s, all the way through when she retired. It really wasn't a discussion. And as I've been thinking about this show, it's really a great discussion I need to have with my daughter, because I haven't had that discussion with her on, hey, what's sort of the mark that you're leaving on the world, and what's that impact that you're having, and you just need to think about that and have that perspective as you move forward in life.
Yes, I might call what you're pointing to a living legacy, in consciously thinking about why are you making the decisions that you're making, and compared to just kind of going through life, like one of those people that's like behind their steering wheel in their car and they seem like they're half awake.
Right. And it should appeal to those folks that are planners, right? I plan a lot of aspects of my life and think about, always like to have a plan and be organized. And it was one thing until this talk, I hadn't spent a whole lot of time thinking about your legacy, because it is sometimes it's associated with death, and death is a tough topic. And we also, it reminds us of our mortality,
Yes.
and it's challenging to think about.
Yes, very much so. It's interesting. There's so many commercials I see out there where there's like a time element. The ticker is on, the clock is moving, or even just sports games, whether it's golf or football, etc. And yet we rarely think about the fact that our life, time is one of those non-renewable resources. But I think on the happier note, it's being at what I call personal agency with your legacy. So if you're thinking about things like philanthropy or investments, all of those can be a part of the conversation, or simply how you're living your life's values.
Right. Or making every one of those seconds count. Right. We want to make sure that, as that clock keeps moving forward, that we can, I've worked hard post Army to continue making sure that I keep putting one foot in front of another every day, because I want to keep growing and I want to keep learning, and I don't want to stagnate. And I frankly don't want to look backwards. I would prefer to look forwards. Now, that's just me. And so I don't know if that resonates with you.
It does. And I think there are many people who are watching this podcast when they are going to be watching it that are going to be interested in this subject. Many of the viewers and listeners are under age 40. So they're thinking about these topics, and they want, in what I call in today's knowledge economy, they want to know, how do I do this thing called life? How do I plan for a legacy? Because normally legacy planning is either just for the affluent, but what's interesting today is, again, at least 2/3 of today's wealthy are self-made. So they don't necessarily know what the roadmap looks like. And so I think that they kind of check out, how do other people do it? What are they thinking about? What are they talking about? How did they deal with that?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one of the books that as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about the book. It's an older book called The Millionaire Next Door, and how, most millionaires in the United States are folks that are just living right next door to you, and you don't really realize that they're that affluent and need to think about their legacy, because a lot of them, small business owners, entrepreneurs, they may be first generational wealth and not really thinking about how to pass it on.
Yeah. So I want to share this metaphor, and then I'd like to ask you about your values. One of the metaphors, and you might get a kick out of this, is I think sometimes coaches, and you're a coach yourself, it's like guiding your client through the forest to the canoe by the lake. So look out for that poison ivy. Don't step on the rocks. You could sprain your ankle. And I think for those who have gone ahead and they've done the inner work, or they've just been in the trenches long enough, they will know how to guide others so that they will finally make it to the canoe by the lake. If not, entrepreneurship or even legacy planning is an area that you kind of fail your way to success. And if you don't have to, what I call unnecessarily traumatize yourself, then it's best to kind of tune into podcasts and listen to some other coaches and figure out, if you can't have a direct mentor at the season of your life, there's so many people that are willing to offer content complimentary to help, in those initial steps of, how do I figure this thing out?
Right. Podcasts are so amazing. Anytime I try to teach myself something new, I'll go find somebody that's blogging on it, and then find a couple of podcasts. Like, I don't know about you, but I did my own webpage, and I found a blogger on Squarespace. I followed her for weeks and read a whole bunch of different articles, and then listened to her podcasts. I'm like, okay, I can start doing this. One of the big hurdles for entrepreneurs and legacy planners uh, is this fear of sort of starting out, and folks want to wait until they have this perfect thing.
Yeah.
And I am of the opposite mentality, and especially with others that are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, I'm like, hey, start now. Your first thing is not going to be right, and you got to be okay with it, and you just keep iterating and making it better every day. And you may not get it totally right, but you'll learn and you'll grow and you'll get better. And I think that's the best way to start out as an entrepreneur.
Yes, I want to share something that you mentioned on one of your previous podcasts, and it's being, you had shared being afraid of heights, and yet you still jumped out of the airplane. And I think one of the things that entrepreneurs worry about, and of course, if you are an entrepreneur, that's a part of your legacy, your business, even though it's one aspect of it. But I think there's this fear of, if I look bad while trying. And one of the things you said is, it was not pretty when I jumped out of the airplane. You just kind of close your eyes and you go.
Right. Well, if you're worried about how it's going to look, you're probably not taking enough risks, right? Because when you jump out of an airplane or you're a paratrooper, there's the Army teaches you this whole 5-step process to actually fall down, and nobody actually does it. You end up falling like a sack of potatoes, and if you walk away from it, it's okay. It doesn't have to look that pretty, but if you walk away from it and you're not injured, it's a win. And
Yes.
so you got to be willing to accept that and be, okay, this may be embarrassing because I have to stretch myself and I have to develop myself, and it's got to be a reach. If I look good at doing it, it probably isn't enough of a reach.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So what values do you get to honor when you are teaching other people about leadership, and even thinking about having more conversations about legacy with your daughter? What values do you get to honor?
Uh, yeah, yeah. So some things, and frankly, they aren't values, but they're more attributes. I would like to say that hard work is a part of me, instilled from my parents. A lifetime of physical fitness was another thing that was instilled by my parents. And being a reader was instilled by my parents in the same way that your father sent you off to the library. Two things that I've developed after I left the home, I would say I have a greater personal growth mindset, and the idea, just like we talked about earlier, that I'm always trying to put one foot in front of the other, trying to grow, trying to develop, trying to learn new things. It's that shark analogy that you got to keep swimming, or the shark dies because they have to have the water going over their gills. Sharks are
Oh,
always moving.
okay.
They never stop, because if they stop, they die. So it's that
Didn't know
same
that.
sort of you've got to keep growing and keep learning. And even as you get into your 70s and 80s and 90s, keep growing and trying to learn new things. And then the last part is well-traveled. We did a lot of travel around the United States as kids growing up, but I became an international traveler while I was at West Point. I took my first international trip to Germany in 1991. And went skiing for a couple of days and went to Berlin and stuff. And since then I have eagerly looked forward to opportunities to travel as much as possible and see as much as possible of the world as I can.
Yeah. Gosh, if you lean into that, what a positive role model for your daughter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to go to Alaska this summer. We last international trip was pre-COVID. We went to London and Paris.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So I know that you mentioned that your parents were positive role models. And that's one of the things I kind of harp on in this podcast, because I think it's so important to see people modeling what it is to take massive action, to be courageous, and to design their legacies, compared to just allowing the default to design their legacy. One of the things I also share is the saying or the expression, what apathy is doing to your legacy is just not right. So who else has been a positive role model in your life?
Yeah, so of course my parents, but one of the biggest persons that has been a positive role model was General David Petraeus. For 2 years, I was General Petraeus's aide, first in Bosnia, then in the United States at Fort Campbell, and then in Iraq. This is from 2001 to 2003. And I had an opportunity to work with him every day. I find him, he was an outstanding model as a leader, but personally, and he's still been a mentor and a friend ever since. But some things that I took away from him was it's okay to be competitive. Life is a competition. And he was always, he and I worked really well together. I said at one point in time that General Petraeus is the most competitive person on the planet. My ex-wife would chime in, then you must be the second most competitive person on the planet. And I was like, oh no, it doesn't work like that. You can't be the second most competitive person on the planet. You need to be number one. But we worked well together, and he did a great job of always raising the bar for me in a positive way. Hey, can you do one more thing? Hey, can you do this a little bit more efficient? Hey, can you do this a little bit better? That same sort of personal growth mindset, I think I took away from him, in this idea that every day you're trying to get better, every day you're trying to improve, and trying to make it the best that you possibly can be.
Yes, very cool. Wow, you knew
Yeah,
Petraeus.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, spent a lot of time with him.
Very,
Um,
very cool.
if you want a small funny story, so uh, we're both cyclists now. He was a big runner for a while. I was a big runner for a while. We trained up to do the Army 10 miler together. And we're now both cyclists, and there's a virtual cycling app out there called Zwift. And you can earn badges on it. And so we have this running competition to see who has earned the most badges. I'm here to report, unfortunately, that I'm about 6 badges behind him. He's got like 145 and I've got 139 or something like that.
Wow, that's fun. That's good though. I
Yeah,
think it's like one of the things we spoke about before I pressed the record button is having those things to look forward to
yeah.
keep challenging yourself and so forth. Okay, so speaking about leadership,
Mhm.
so you had the opportunity to be influenced by David Petraeus' leadership, and you talk about something called gritty leadership. So my question isn't so much what does it mean to you? Because I know all the other podcast hosts and hostesses have asked that question. Um, my question is more so regarding entrepreneurship and leadership today. You're in the corporate world as an executive coach. What area do you think needs the most grit?
So for small business owners, I'll take this back to this idea of fear. And having, my last job pre-Army was I was a busboy at a restaurant in high school. And then I was in the Army for basically 28 years, if you count my time at West Point. And so I got a check every 2 weeks from the government, and I got paid. And then all of a sudden I became a small business entrepreneur in March of 2020. I founded the company, and all of a sudden you're on your own as a small business entrepreneur. And if you don't bring a client in the door, you aren't keeping the lights on. And so I have huge respect for all those entrepreneurs that are out there listening and trying to make it work and trying to do it, because I went a whole quarter without a client. And I had this fear of failure. And I think that is the biggest thing that folks can take away from some of my gritty ideas, is this idea: how do you build this courage to deal with this fear of failure? And the fear of failure, folks, it's not like you're scared and huddled in the corner, but it'll manifest itself like, hey, I'm gonna, procrastinate,
It'll
or I'm not
freeze
gonna
them.
start. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you just won't start, or whatever. And so one of the ways that I manage that, and I talk to others about managing that fear, is the idea of listing down what's the worst thing that can possibly happen, and then figuring out a way to sort of manage it. And I did that with my business. I was like, hey, look, I'm going to do this for a year. And at that year mark, I'm going to assess how things are going, but I'm all in for a year. And what the worst thing that can happen is I'm going to lose some money on this. But if it's not going in a year, I will, close down the website and pack things up and send my resume out and go get sort of a normal job. But that helped me manage that fear of failure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think it was so 25 years in the US Army, do you think
Mhm.
it was the fact that once you signed the contract, it was basically like you either were going to jump out of the airplane, but it wasn't like you could be like, no, I changed my mind. So in other words, sometimes I think when people have like too many options, they just don't do anything, compared to when they're backed into a corner, they either have to grow or, go into another time dimension. And I don't know if we know how to do that.
Yeah. Sometimes having too many decisions, like you're talking about, causes decision paralysis.
Yeah, yeah,
Paralysis.
yeah, it's paralyzing. Yeah,
Paralyzing,
paralysis.
paralysis,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
word. And so, that paralysis, inhibits folks from actually making a decision because they have so many options out there. When I coach these high performing individuals, it's like they have all these sort of silver balls out there that they can chase because they could do this or they could do this. And the hardest thing for them is settling on one and going all in on one and seeing that to whether it's they succeed or fail.
So what else could help our focus?
Yeah, so to
When
help
we're
people
faced with the analysis paralysis.
right, and there's so many options. One of the things that I work with my executive coaching clients is I ask them, hey, pick out your top 3 priorities, whatever they are, and whatever line of business you're in, or if you're a small business owner, or what are the top 3 things, and then take the intellectual effort and think about what are the 3 things that you're either not doing or you've told your team that it's okay to just meet the bare minimum. And that is super hard for folks because, as you know, most businesses are out there and they're like, hey, we've got 20 different things that we're going to be great at and all this, and forcing yourself to actually take and think about your top 3 priorities, and then
Okay.
what you've said, hey, we're not going to do this, or we're not going to be good at all at this, frees up that bandwidth to really focus on and be great at sort of the top 3 things.
Yeah. So if I were to say to you that one of the number one things that slows down or halts somebody writing or following through with their legacy plan is lack of self-worth, do you think that when entrepreneurs first start out, do you think that when they're spread so thin, it's fear of rejection? Because if I try 50 things, someone's bound to say yes. Or what do you think is, psychologically going on for them?
Yeah, no, that one's a tough one to unpack because even I've been running my company over 2 years. There are points in time when I still feel like an imposter, and I'm like, why are folks why are folks listening to me? This is so challenging, and so you do have to sort of refocus yourself and go, okay, yes, I have value. I can help people. I can do this stuff. And I'm not an imposter, and I can do this. I can get this thing done.
Yeah. So changing that internal story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that helps a
Yeah.
lot.
I know that you spoke about a number of examples in the military when, you saw firsthand if the fellow soldier could trust themselves or not in that moment.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that I talked to a lot of folks about is this idea of personal purpose and making sure that you understand what your why is, whatever that is. And it takes some tough intellectual work to think through what's your why, what's your purpose, and it's fun. I find it fun, and I hope the executives that I coach find it useful. But to take them through that process and say, okay, what are your top 5 values? How does that turn into your purpose? And take that idea, and then how does that nest with your goals? Because what are you trying to accomplish, and does that come back to your personal purpose?
That's
Tying all that
powerful.
together, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
takes some work.
I just want to intrude for a second that I think that's powerful because it's allowing that person to be unique and to be noticed and to come forward compared to just being a number in some business's spreadsheet.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So as you work again with gritty leadership, and I think you have a book out with the same title,
Yeah.
what do you think is gritty today in business? Is it that lack of focus? Is it the freezing with the fear?
Yeah, so so I define gritty organizations as those organizations. It's the group's will to accomplish long-term goals,
Okay.
and you see it. It's easier done in privately held businesses than publicly held businesses. But this idea of always looking at the quarterly numbers or the monthly numbers really drives some short-sighted decisions that may not be there in the best long-term interest of the company. And you can look at, the recent, the challenges with Peloton and how, they have a great product, a great set of classes, but they struggle with the monetization of it because they took some really short-sighted decisions rather than taking sort of a long-term growth approach to it. So I would define Peloton, despite it taking some grit to actually get through one of the Peloton classes,
Okay.
uh, that they don't have that sort of gritty organizational mindset that focuses on the long term over the short term.
Yeah. So I think what you're pointing to is 100-year goals, 50-year goals, more than just the typical 1, 3, and 5 that most businesses are focusing in on because they're just trying to survive.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I would even be happy if the businesses is focused on just a 5 and a 10 year, because I think that takes a little bit longer focus, and yet still accounts for some changes in the environment, changes in the market that are going to happen in 5 to 10 years that we don't anticipate.
Yes.
I do a lot of work with a truck stop company, and one of the more interesting things is the bet on the future of long haul trucking, and what sort of engine is going to be there in the future truck, whether it's going to be electric, which there's four major truck companies out there, all of which are using a different electric system. Hydrogen is also an option, which requires a completely different infrastructure out there. And so the bet on what the highway looks like in 5 to 10 years is really neat, and I find it fascinating.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you for helping with the leadership development of those individuals and looking into the future. I'm aware that with artificial intelligence, about half the service jobs might be eliminated, but it also brings new opportunity to develop, I would say, more human or humane sides of ourselves. Because if in the future we don't have to necessarily see the doctor, he or she just reads the lab results, then it also opens up opportunities to develop other parts of ourselves.
Right, right.
Yeah.
There's lots of options out there. You got to be flexible and nimble to be able to seize those options as the environment changes.
Yes, very much so. So many people say that commerce is like war in the business world. So what have you found is the same regarding human nature and the parallels between what you've seen in combat situations and then in the entrepreneurial world in the economic marketplace?
Yeah, so one of the things I do is I blog once a week on leadership topics, and uh, when the war in Ukraine kicked off, I actually switched to blogging about the war in Ukraine, and so for the last 60, 70 days, I've been blogging on that. One of the more recent blog posts, I talk about Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in his wartime leadership, or leadership in crisis. And
Okay.
there's a couple of things where business leaders can use some of the things that Zelensky has used as a successful leader of his country in this time of crisis. You know, some folks are comparing Zelensky to Winston Churchill during the Battle of Britain in 1940, and how he led the United Kingdom through the darkest hour, which was, the recent movie. Zelensky has done the same thing. And there's
Okay.
three things that business leaders can take away from this as they operate in the next crisis. And frankly, business leaders have been operating in a crisis for the last 2 years with COVID. And they may not be giving themselves enough credit for their leadership in crisis, but they did steer their team and their family and themselves through this crisis. We do have a potential future crisis with inflation going on right now, and the change in gas prices. But three things Zelensky has done: he's remained calm, cool, and collected throughout this time period. He has been calm, cool, and collected. The second thing that he's done is he's led by example, and he's shared hardships with the frontline soldiers that are fighting in Ukraine. You've seen him out touring Bucha, the village where the atrocities happen. He's toured the front lines. He's gone and visited soldiers in the hospital, and he's demonstrated that he's leading by example, and he's doing the shared hardships that the rest of the people. And he stayed in the palace in Kiev while it was being bombarded. And then finally, the thing that he does so well is communicate. He wasn't he got a law degree. He was an actor. His wife was actually a writer on the comedy show that he was in. But he's done a phenomenal job of communicating, both to his own people and to the worldwide global audience. And he's done that through multiple mediums from his communication and the fact that every day he's communicating to his people and the Western world to try to get help for Ukraine and see them through this crisis. But those three things, calm, cool, and collected, shared experiences and leading by example, and then communicate, are things that business leaders can take away from Ukraine and apply it tomorrow at whatever crisis they've got in their business.
Yeah, I think where you might be pointing to is survival, that whether it's money or it's war, it's survival.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and will we choose to step up and grow from it compared to allowing it to grow backwards?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, very nice. Thank you so much. So when you think about leadership today, whether it's political leadership or business leadership, what do you think are some of the things that help, or what are some of the things that could be slowing leadership down? Because one of the things I have thought about is I don't know if there's as much of a rite of passage today with young adults as there was, let's say, so many decades ago. And so, what do you have to say about leadership regarding what slows it down, or what could we use more of?
Yeah, that interesting question. So I I am convinced that the current generation is no different than my generation or boomers or whatever. Every generation says that the next generation is soft and not as hard
Not going to
and
make it.
not going to make it.
We were
You know,
tougher. We walked uphill on the snow both ways.
right. And I joke that the generation in front of me complained, like we didn't have to deal with Betamax, or we had Atari or any of the stuff that they didn't have, or we didn't have to deal with 8 tracks or whatever. Every generation thinks the next generation isn't as hard. They are going through their own rite of passages. I don't think we've given ourselves enough credit of the rite of passage of COVID and its effect on both leaders. Leaders have had to steer, they had to turn on a dime, go from working in an office to hybrid or from work from home, then try to figure out what the right plan is to get the organization back in the office at whatever level you are, whether you lead a 3-person team or a 30,000 person organization. In, to draw a historic analogy, because I am a historian, it's our generation, we'll say all generations that are alive right now. So you've got 4 or 5 generations out there, but it's our generation's depression. Whether, it was a nationwide pandemic that affected the entire nation, and we have changed because of it. And folks have had to lead organizations, lead their family, lead their parents through this. And I find that folks there's some folks out there that are doing a good job at it, and there's some folks out there that need a little help, and that's okay. Hopefully they reach outside for somebody like you to help them improve their leadership or design their legacy, or reach out to me to figure out their gritty leadership.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to is a number of businesses had to pivot to go 100% online if they couldn't have their doors open. I know many wonderful restaurants that have been around for decades all of a sudden had to master the drive-through and takeout, and yet their businesses survived. Many thrived. I know in the knowledge economy, there were many coaches, if they were willing to go online and learn, let's say, Facebook marketing or YouTube marketing, all of a sudden they found new customers and students, because with the doors not open to physical schools, whether it's public or private schools, the thirst for knowledge didn't stop. And if we point back to survival, people want to know the answers. It's, David, how do we get through this? Tell me. And if you're on video, I'll take what I can get. It's
Yeah.
not, if I can't walk into your office, for instance,
Yeah.
or your workshop.
And look at new opportunities that have sprung out of this. I had never used Instacart pre-COVID, and now there's a whole company out there that delivers stuff to your door, and it's frictionless, basically, because they remember my credit card, they remember what I've ordered before, and all of a sudden groceries show up and I don't have to go get them.
Yeah. So I just want to highlight again, one of the reasons why I really appreciate coaches coming onto this platform is because the technology industry is about, I don't know, an $800 million or $1 billion business. And I think business coaching is barely breaking 8 to 10 billion. So we have a whole society of people that need coaches for personal development. And, because how do we figure out those moments when a pandemic shuts down all those businesses? How do we survive those moments where everything that we thought was going to consistently be the same as yesterday or a year ago, is different? Like even investing today with NFTs, like who would have thought that I could buy your painting in the back behind you for $300,000, but it's just an icon.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Or the crypto crash that has happened the last couple of days. That has thrown a huge wrench into some people's financial planning.
I know. I know. Okay. So speaking about being tested, so grit is important to you. What has tested your grit? Is it jumping out of a plane 200 times? Is it being shot at? What say you?
uh, so I will definitely say that standing up. So I founded my company in March of 2020. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I like to joke that I wasn't being gritty enough. So I decided that standing up a business as the pandemic was hitting was the right call for me. Um, I will say that being a small business owner has been as scary as jumping out of a plane at 1,000 feet, and I did that 102 times. You
So
still
what's
get
scary? I'm sorry to interrupt you. So what's scary about that?
uh,
Not the
uh,
plane part, but the
well, just the risk and the idea that, hey, if people aren't buying, if the market isn't buying what I'm selling, or I can't get my voice heard in the market, that I won't be able to provide for myself and my daughter, there's a huge amount of pressure. And to me, at least, that was as scary as jumping out of a plane.
okay.
There isn't really a framework on it. You find your friends that you can talk to that are maybe entrepreneurs, or get in a coach's, in a CEO's little round table to share experiences and best practices.
Or a
And
mastermind. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or you listen to podcasts and listen to other folks talk about it. But um, the army deals with the fear of jumping out of a plane through rituals and using people all repeating back different phrases as a way to help manage that fear and the adrenaline.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there
And all
isn't a
that
frame.
camaraderie.
Right. And you've got the
Yeah.
camaraderie, and you're around people that like high adventure and have volunteered to do it. And, and once you do it a couple of times, it starts to get a little bit less scary, but it's still never less scary from the first time to the 102nd time.
Yeah.
Uh, but with a small business, there isn't a framework, and you don't know sometimes if you're making a wrong decision, or your website doesn't resonate with folks, or the search engine optimization isn't there, or the podcast you're going on aren't getting the word out to potential clients. There isn't a whole lot of framework there. And
Okay.
so for me, at least, I would compare those two. I will say that getting shot at, or blown up, or mortared, or whatever, was a little bit more scary. But I would consider standing up a small business in the pandemic was one of the more scary things out there that I've ever done.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with someone regarding what you're speaking about the other day. Robert Kiyosaki wrote this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and in there he had this visual diagram called the cash flow quadrant. And I relate this back to what you said regarding the support and the camaraderie. If, let's say, we are business owners, how easy will it be for us to relate to employees, or vice versa? How easy will it be for an employee who's working 3 jobs to relate to that investor that just lost 500 million with Bitcoin? So I think that when you talk about like the lack of framework, or feeling like you're walking into a wilderness of, who can relate, who can I talk with about this? I think a part of the fact of it is keeping the door open for people who are different, absolutely, but also realizing how much you have to find birds of the same feather, because you don't want to necessarily talk about your niche of needs if the other party, can't even pay their rent, or is, dealing with something else.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the I struggled with a certain a certain problem, and I'm not entirely sure that the other person is struggling with the same problem. And you're just trying to work through that. And the other thing that I found was, I wrapped a large portion of my identity because I'm risking it in standing up this company and trying to give it a go and make it work. And you definitely have to acknowledge that as a small business owner, that you're wrapping some part of your identity into this business.
Yeah.
And if it fails, you have to figure out how you're going to how your own personal identity is going to handle that.
Yeah. How you're going to cope.
Yeah.
Like you said, I could always just work a job and not allow it to destroy me. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
speaking of those moments that you have to trust yourself, what was one moment that you had to trust yourself beyond your comfort zone?
Yeah. So the biggest, the biggest thing that that I would say that I was ever entrusted with was I was a battalion commander in Afghanistan from 2010 to 2011. It was an infantry battalion. We were doing counterinsurgency ops in southeast Afghanistan in a province called Paktika. And the U.S. Army and the American people entrusted the lives of 700 American soldiers into my care for the entire year. And we did some things right. We did some things wrong, and we made mistakes. We fought the Taliban as hard as we could for that year. We tried to make a difference in that little corner of Afghanistan, it was a huge amount of trust, and that the leadership that I worked for had in me, and then also the American people with their sons and daughters that were part of that organization, which was they were known as the Iron Rakkasans. It was 3rd Battalion of the 187 Infantry out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Yeah, one thing I think that's that there's a commonality between, I might say, legacy and what you just spoke about, which is combat, is a lot of times people don't realize the extent of responsibility that can come with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that part isn't always talked about. They just think about like the Hollywood glamour side.
Yeah.
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 If you were to pinpoint one problem that your consulting business solves today, what would that one problem be? Like lack of leadership development resources, or?
Yeah. So, so as the thing that I'm doing the most of right now is coaching. And with the executives that I work with, I think I do a pretty good job of helping them understand their strengths and gaps, spending some good time understanding their personal purpose, and then building some solid goals to work on through the remainder of our sessions that help them grow as a leader. Each one's individual, as I'm sure you're coaching, each person's an individual, each person's legacy is different. For me, each executive is different, and they have some strengths, and I try to leverage those strengths and try to help them figure out ways to manage their shortcomings and deal with challenges that arise during the 6 months that we get to work together.
Yeah. So I think what you're pointing to is the space that's needed for them to speak honestly about their experience and receive that support.
Yeah, and the challenges that they're facing. To have a trusted agent that they can talk to about it and get some advice. One of the things that I do differently than other executive coaches is I try to insist that the client does what I call take your coach to work day. And so I try to go with them for a day and follow them around. I let them pick the day, and I will go meet them anywhere in the world and spend a day with them. So I get to know their business, I get to know their direct reports and how they run meetings and stuff like that. And I think it makes me a more effective executive coach because I know a little bit more about their business. I know about them a little bit more, and I get to see the folks that they work with.
So that's reading the landscape and boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. And it's been a lot of fun for me because I've gotten to explore a lot of different industries and see different American business models and what's working. And sometimes I can help take an idea from one company to another company because I'm seeing a bunch of different ideas out there.
Yeah, very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
So I just have a couple more questions, but one
Sure.
of the things that we talked about is setting an intention for this podcast episode. And I think I just want to be transparent in the connection that you made between how the military views long-term planning and then being able to merge that with legacy planning. So would you share a little bit about how you might lean into, the military's model? Because I think that brings some very good insights, and we haven't walked a mile in your boots, so please share.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the military planning tools that's out there is called backwards planning. And it's nothing more than thinking about a certain point in time in the future and what does success look like at that point in time in the future. And that's challenging for people because most people frontwards plan. They take where they are at right now and they try to think forward on how they're going to try to get to someplace. And backwards planning says, okay, jump to the end, figure out what the end of the story looks like, and then go backwards and figure out the steps all the way back to where you are right now. And so break the plan, with the folks that are designing their legacy, think about what your legacy is. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And for me, as I was getting ready for this podcast, I think, okay, fast forward to 2060. And so at that point in time, I'm trying to think what my legacy looks like in 2060. Go, okay, this, I want to do this and I want to be that, and, this is where I'd like to be living and all this sort of legacy stuff. And then go, okay, well, what do I have to do in 2055? What do I have to do in 2050? What do I have to do in 2045? All the way back here to 2022. So then I think, okay, now I've got a plan that gets me to that legacy and where I want to be when I'm close, as we talked about, as the clock is running out, or we're close to the goal line with our lives.
So I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment.
Yeah.
Let's say it's the final day of your life and there's a hardcover coffee table book in your living room and your daughter's going to receive it. What's inside that tells her about the legacy of her dad?
Yeah. So the things that I wanted to leave as a legacy, I would like to be known as a good father.
Okay. I mean, would you tell her about your 5 values? Like, would you? We got 10 chapters.
Yeah. Yeah. So
would you take her to work and show her the what it was to walk a mile in dad's shoes each decade when he started out as an entrepreneur?
Well, yeah, that's fascinating. I had not thought about it at that sort of depth. I have tried to take her, she insists she's employee number 2 at the company because I've paid her to do like filing and organizing and stuff right now. So she's helped in this decade.
Yeah.
I took her to work when I was in the Army. So we've ran obstacle courses together and done stuff like that. So she's seen that. But you're right, think about, a chapter of each decade and I find the more important thing when I share things to talk about what went well and then what didn't go well and what I learned from it and I'm trying to do better in the future. And so I think each chapter for the next decade, so we'll do the 2020s, the 2030s, the 2040s, the 2050s. In each decade, I think would say, hey, these are the things that I got right and these were the things that I got wrong. And I tried to learn and grow out of these things that I got wrong. And I tried to keep doing all the things that I got right.
Yeah.
And I know I won't get it right every decade, but I think it makes me a better person if I take that approach.
Ooh, so a coffee table book is self-reflection.
Yeah, yeah.
Deep stuff. Very good, very good.
Yeah.
So I know that we got to wrap in a second and you'll share your website and your book, which I believe is behind you. It's orange in color.
Yeah, so Grow Your Grit. It's on. It's out
on your desk too.
It's out on Amazon, and hopefully some of your listeners will take a listen, and hopefully it helps them be a little bit more gritty and accomplish their long range goals.
Yeah, very cool. So I realize that you are a leadership expert. So my final question to you is, why does it matter in society for us to develop our legacies?
to go back to the beginning, developing our legacies is the impact that we've had on the world. And, I want to see, things continue to get better and improve, and new inventions and new ideas and stuff come to fruition. And whatever your niche is, help a better place by this, by keeping this idea in mind, hey, our legacy, what was the impact that we're trying to do, and whether it's history or inventing things or just working a 9-to-5 job, you can make your little part of the world a better place and have a little bit better impact on it.
Very nice. So the ordinary getting to become the extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a great quote.
Thank you, David, very much for sharing your leadership thoughts and also just coming prepared and allowing this subject of legacy to matter to you. Because, I'll throw out that expression again, what apathy is doing to our legacies is just not right. And I think that your will and perseverance to push through, whether it's after retiring from 24 years as a paratrooper to just being willing to start again and take the next risk, the next adventure, I think serves as what I call the positive role model for anyone who's watching as they try and figure out the Rubik's Cube of how do I make this, this life happen? How do I make this business work? And how do I show up even as a leader?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's challenging, but I think everybody out there can do it.
Very nice. And any final thoughts or last word on legacy?
No, just thank you for having me on, and I really enjoyed the discussion today. You got me to think about some things that I hadn't thought about before. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Very cool. Okay, so I'm going to close this out with my paragraph.
Okay, go.
Okay. So in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every aspect of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content of this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, or Apple Podcasts, please rate and review. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, David, for being a guest speaker.
Thank you for having me, Angelina.